There are interesting links between climate change and ozone depletion. As a first approximation, these are two separate problems, the ozone problem and the climate change problem. And often people tend to confuse a little bit these two issues. Some people think that the exhaust from the cars deplete ozone, and people think that ozone depletion leads to global warming. And this is not exactly the case. But still, if you look at this in a bit more detail, you find out that there are actually some quite strong links between the two problems, actually in both directions. Firstly, when we have global warming at the ground, it actually gets colder in the stratosphere where ozone depletion takes place. If you go 10-15 years back or so, then these two fields of research, the research on climate change and research on ozone, were quite separate fields of research. But in more recent years, one has realized the close links between these two problems. So now modelers, they take both these problems into account when they do their research. So this is now being like integrated or coupled to a much larger extent than before. We have talked about the 2 or 3 main classes of ozone depleting substances, namely the CFCs, the HCFCs and the halons. But there is also a fourth category of compounds that are of interest in this context, and that is the HFCs, the hydrofluorocarbons. They are not ozone depleting, but they replace ozone depleting compounds. So in that sense, they belong in the same area of problem, if you wish. The interesting thing about HFCs is that they are very strong greenhouse gases. So for that reason, we would like to avoid too much use of the HFCs. As of today, there is not much of these gases in the atmosphere. But if the usage that we now see and the rapid increase in the use of HFCs continues, then in the future we might see quite substantial concentrations of HFCs in the atmosphere, and that will have a big warming effect. It is a greenhouse gas in the same way as CO2 and methane and so on. So if we get too much HFCs in the atmosphere, that will have a global warming effect. So for that reason, we should try and phase out also the HFCs.